What a great day, and what a great reunion, isn't it? I see a few missing in action after last night's celebration, but we thank all of you for being here. My name is Rodolfo Vaquerizo, SM91, and I'm very pleased to introduce our guest speakers this morning, Israel Ruiz, MIT's Executive Vice President and Treasurer, an MOT alum of the class of 2001, and Steve Marsh, Managing Director of the MIT Investment Management Company. Since 2010, MIT has been working to bring new vibrancy and diversity to Kendall Square, the most innovative square mile on the planet. This process has involved both the MIT and Cambridge communities over the years and has served to shape the Kendall Square initiative. As a result, MIT is now poised to deliver a dynamic blend of uses in this area, including housing, lab and research space, retail, innovation space, open space, and a dedicated facility for the MIT Museum. Israel and Steve are here with us this morning to share a more detailed look into the Kendall Square initiative and the Institute's contributions to enhancing the life and character of the Kendall Square ecosystems. Please join me in welcoming Israel Ruiz and Steve Marsh.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. And before we get started, this is a topic that Steve and I feel really, really passionate about, and we'll get you through that in a moment. But any one of you took decision analysis classes or some sort of that, well, at Sloan? Can you raise your hand? Okay, just go back and take it. But with a day like today, that decision should lead to being outside, not being here. So the second one is like, anyone from class before 2010, raise a hand. Anyone from 2010 and beyond? Okay, so you have seen two Sloans, very different Sloans. And what we're going to tell you a little bit about is these two different Sloans. I was here in 2001, and the last question, promise, is like, raise the hands of MOT01s. This is the unfriendly part of the audience. These are my friends. These are my friends. And they were late at night. So watch out. So we wanted to tell you something else. It's like, this is actually, you're returning to campus for a great reunion, but also at a great time for this campus and for MIT. So 2016 celebrates a century in Cambridge, since MIT moved from Boston to Cambridge in 1916. And the vibrancy that most of us have seen, it's something that at the time clearly was not given. So I wanted to start with a quote. If you picked up a newspaper today and you have had a chance to walk around Kendall Square and you identify what's going on, it's a pretty vibrant neighborhood. And you could read something like this in a newspaper today. Something that talks about improving public health, the concentration of scientific knowledge, communities of individuals, to make fundamental reforms. And pretty much anyone could sign this quote, but this quote was signed by the Director of Public Health of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. But what's really important is that this newspaper was from 1917. So one may think that we are living a very special time, but the reality is around MIT, it has always been a special time. And I've used this 100-year anniversary and celebration to really understand many of the things and aspects of how MIT and MIT Kendall Square became to be what they are today. And how rapidly, and I'll make the argument, how rapidly did it happen in actually the last 20 years, 25 years. So I found lots of interesting data. So I'm the treasurer of MIT aside from the executive vice president. And what it means is there's a corporation, there's a governance that really owns the assets of MIT. The assets of MIT are not the president's or the administration's assets. They are really governed. And this has been going on since the beginning of MIT. And in 1917, this report, I went and read it all. And it's a really interesting thing because the Institute archives have all this information. And I was interested to understand. A lot of people have written about MIT, how science, how management, how the disciplines have evolved, even how the presidents have shaped the future. But very, very few things have been written about the business of MIT, the management of MIT. And after all, Sloan represents that. So do you have a sense of how much the land of MIT cost? So let me give you a sense. This is today, right? So I think for this audience, I don't need to orient you. You know perfectly where we are. And this is today what we define as the campus of MIT, the academic footprint of MIT. So let me tell you first that today this campus is about 14 million square feet, which is about 14 times when it first moved to Cambridge. How much do you think it cost to acquire the land in which we now sit? 10,000? 750,000. You guys are cheap. Yes?
500,000.
You're a physicist. So 750,000 was the cost of the land. Now, we built 1 million square feet. How much did that cost?
When was that? 750,000 when?
Well, in 1917, 1916, when we moved. So MIT acquired the land in which at the time, this is the Back Bay, the famous Boston Back Bay, Beacon Hill. And the dream was to create the other side of Back Bay, but no one wanted to come. No one wanted to come. And the one that said, yes, I'm coming, is MIT. I'll tell you a little bit of why, but the first one is the cost. The second one is how much did it cost, right? After all, Steve and I are responsible for cost around here.
I think it was 6 or 7 million.
$7 million bucks. He knew the answer. He works at MIT. So $7 million. But the most important thing is MIT made its move when the endowment of MIT had $5 million. So now think about it, right? Think about this move. People have talked about the bold move. Well, if today Steve or I went to the boardroom and said, MIT wants to spend $17 billion, would be the equivalent to make a move, I don't think Steve and I would last more than a second in that room. So this was the impact that MIT had. But now imagine what was around this in 1916. So we know what's around us today. And what's around us today in this densely packed, concentrated innovation ecosystem is pretty much anyone you know and anyone you will know in a few years. So we have 9 of the top 10 big pharma companies in the world sited around us, their R&D headquarters. There's no other region in the world that's doing that. We have energy companies, Schlumberger. We have Saudi Aramco. You may have read about a possible IPO of Saudi Aramco, and you may have known that the trillions of dollars that it's managed. Draper Laboratories, spin-outs of MIT, Whitehead Institute, Broad Institute, Reagan Institute. All of those are either spin-outs or very much related to MIT. And I see folks taking pictures. I assume that we can then distribute the slides to you, so you don't need to take any notes or anything like that. And then you see a bunch of other logos. Most of them you recognize. Google, IBM Watson, Vertex, Genzyme, Momenta, HubSpot. So many of those are startup companies. Many of those are in the progress of being startup. And then the Cambridge Innovation Center, which is the home of 700, 800 startups right in one of the buildings right there. So we know this today. The question is how did it happen? And what role did MIT have in happening? So there are 3 ingredients that have been there always. This special physical environment from the movement of MIT to 1916 all the way through today. We have this specially connected environment. The main group of MIT, now Sloan, enjoying these 3 really amazing, beautiful, renovated buildings and new buildings. The second one is the financial support. Having money makes a difference. When MIT was just a research institution recovering its cost, it could not really have that much of it. And the third one is what you represent, the concentration of human talent with these big aspirations in which these ideas are bold and radical and crazy. And after a while, they don't seem that crazy and they don't seem that bold, and they do get implemented. But now let me backtrack to the time of MIT. So MIT made that move in the early 20th century. Who was around? And what was the reason that the people from Back Bay did not want to move to the other side? Well, it was smelly, dirty, crazy, right? It was the industrial side. We had, at the turn of the Industrial Revolution, we had anywhere from rubber to ink to pork to printing presses, gas companies. And if you were a manufacturer in the United States, you could read in every newspaper, "Come to Kendall Square." So that was one of the motivations that MIT had to come to Kendall Square, to be close to this industrial conglomerate, to where the problems were, to where science and technology could make a really difference in solving them. So this lasted for the first part of the 20th century. In fact, I was having a couple of side chats about Volpe. So this is 1973. I'm not going to ask who's before or after that, but 1973, this is the environment around MIT. It's the same shot I showed you before, just one side. 2005, this is the shot. Today it hasn't changed that much. There are a few more buildings, but not that many more. And you can see two iconic buildings to situate yourselves. The first one is this oddly shaped building right here, which appears right there. This is Stata. This one right here, which appears right here. So this one is the home of Draper Laboratory, the spin-out of MIT. And this one is the home of the research headquarters of the Department of Transportation, the Volpe site. You may or may not know this site was preserved to be NASA headquarters, and I know one of my classmates represents NASA. So NASA headquarters was going to go right here. And then after that, after President Kennedy was assassinated, the site went to Houston. So this site has been like this for a decade, right? So now you have this at MIT. If you were at MIT these days, you didn't have much where to go. If you were a startup creator, if you were an entrepreneur, where would you go? These were the times in when people started to think about Route 128. And when Route 128 was created, the advertisement, like the same one I showed you, was manufacturer, come to Kendall Square. The advertisement was, come to Route 128. You're 20 minutes from MIT. So I don't know how many locals I have in the room, but as I say, 20 minutes is the time it takes to get out of the Sloan garage. So that has created an impact. Because if you are in the world of innovation, it does take some contact. It does take some collision work. Well, now what happened here? Well, it happened that one developer in particular, Boston Properties, took on a big swath like this, right here, and developed what today is Cambridge Center on the north side of Main Street. And that's a massive development, and it took it on and developed and started to create the density and the necessary adjacencies to start sprawling into those areas. Okay, so let me keep going. So I think I'm getting now to, I know we have representation from classes around this time. So this is a hugely biased chart, and there's a hugely kind of bias of like selection bias in here, right? So if there were companies that were not here, we cannot find records of them. There were not many, but we wanted to point out, this is work that Alan Markham did, that Vertex, Genzyme, Biogen were the beginnings at this time. So if you remember when biotech was created, this is in the mid-'80s. In the early to mid-'80s, Genentech in Silicon Valley, and here we had Vertex, Biogen, Genzyme. The beginning of the biotech industry started around us. But these are biotechs that had, at the time, so think about where this was development-wise. At the time, they had to vertically integrate, and this is something I can only say to this audience. If I say vertically integrated at MIT, I get kicked out. They had to get really everything to be a biotech, anywhere from R&D to manufacturing of pharmaceuticals, to the processing that it takes, sales forces, commercial forces, everything. You also had Lotus and Polaroid. And I also know there are former members of Polaroid around the room. Well, you know where that ended, you know where Lotus ended. And Draper and Whitehead were the two institutes of MIT. Okay, so what happened then? So first of all, as we all know, because I think most of us took technology strategy classes somewhere, tech waves come and go. And this is actually a pretty dramatic shift. This plot shows you the top 10 employers in Cambridge. Once you take out the top 3, which are invariably Harvard, MIT, and the city itself, those are always the top 3 employers. Now you plot the other top 10 by year since they've started collecting this, 1994 through 2014. And what you see here is Polaroid and Arthur D. Little in the mid-90s playing a huge role around us. In fact, Arthur D. Little, it's the building right there, right? Now it's Sloan's building. Well, you see what happened. My classmates and I were at Sloan right here, right? And I think we all suffered that time. And then you see the beginning of the biotech industry picking up. And now what you see, fast forward, is you see Biogen and Genzyme, and you see a new entrant, Novartis, right in the mid-2000s, that first occupied a small footprint in Technology Square, and today has surpassed. Today is north of 3,000 employees in Cambridge. So if you accumulate this biotech industry that has generated a significant impact around us, you have Akamai, another company based on IP at MIT, an MIT math professor, right in Cambridge Center. And Cambridge Innovation Center, this is the groupings of all of the startup companies and employees that are working in there. So the point being here is that what we want and we care about at MIT is to have a resilient innovation ecosystem. Because yes, we are all smart and we pick the research areas in which MIT in the future will go, but some of them we do not. And when that happens, we want a resilient and diversified portfolio around us that creates the right adjacencies. So more data, because we do love data, right? Office and laboratory space. So today, we have about 50 to 55% of everyone around us being biotech or medical or healthcare. But there's a reason also, right? Most developers work when they have a tenant. And you had office space that's been pretty constant. I'm sorry they don't have the data here of the years, but this is like 1994, actually 1990 all the way to 2015. In 1990, there was about less than half laboratory space. So if you imagine what it takes to create a biotech, you're going back to this Biogen and Vertex and Millennium, in which they had to vertically integrate and produce everything. And if you think about the cost for an entrepreneur in biotech to really do that, to have someone funding everything, it's hundreds of millions of dollars. So now what you see is developers coming in and starting to produce space, some of which space now can be leased, costly, but not to put an investment in capital up front that requires hundreds of millions of dollars. And what you see today is actually laboratory space has surpassed office space, just following the market. One space, as you know, there's people and money. The other one is money. So venture capital investment in biotech. In 1995, there are 3 regions represented in this chart. The top region is New England, and trust me, when I say New England, 99% means around MIT, around Kendall Square. The green part is Silicon Valley, which is most around UC, San Francisco, and that area in Berkeley, not so much Stanford for biotech. And then the rest of the US. And in 1995, there was a total combined investment in biotech by venture capital firms of $800 million, of which MIT, the area around MIT participated at 200. Then you go to 2000, and you see that the MIT area was half of what was being invested in Silicon Valley, and that continued. There was also an effect with the dot-com at the time. The rest of the US was doing pretty good too. And now over time, what you see is our region has got to 2 billion to be exactly the Silicon Valley. In 2015, in fact, we surpassed Silicon Valley in top venture capital investment in biotech at $2.2 billion, and 2.3 being the rest of the US. So think about what I said at the beginning: concentration, space, money. Now you have all of these ingredients that have developed over 2 decades. And what have they produced? What they have produced is, this is the timeline in which we had these institutes, then we had these, what I'm going to call traditional biotechs, Biogen, Genzyme, Millennium, Vertex, which they had to either be cash flow positive, which is a good thing in business most days, or they had to invest hundreds of millions of dollars up front. And then you start seeing all of the move of the Novartis that I talked about, and then you start seeing everybody else moving. And I wanted to just point out maybe a couple of those that you are not yet familiar with or may not be. So the first one is Lab Central. In 2013, Steve and Steve's colleagues used an MIT property to introduce what I'm going to call a timeshare for biotech companies. Right? You can rent a desk. You can rent a wet lab for a month per employee. So think of that, what I said, a $5 million laboratory fit out now becomes an expense that pretty much anyone can create a virtual team. And that's going on, and it's creating an explosion within MIT researchers of trying their developments, their research, and trying to market and commercialize without having this cost of entry. The second one I want to point out is a company called Editas. Editas could be perfectly the Vertex or the Millennium of today. You may all have heard about CRISPR-Cas9, a new research technique that allows to edit the genome. Of course, the genome, MIT, the Broad Institute, Harvard participated in the Human Genome Project and creating the repository of this amassing amount of data around genome. Editas is a company created on the basis of CRISPR-Cas9 with a researcher. It just went public this year. This is north of $1.5 billion in market cap, with lots of potential for new therapeutic applications. Same thing with Moderna. Moderna is also around us. Moderna comes from Flagship Ventures, which is a venture that's another Sloan, Nubar Afeyan. Moderna happens to use the liver to produce pharmaceuticals. That's their thesis. Hadn't been thought before that that was possible. They have now proof. I'm just mentioning this because it's not just the top 9 pharma around us. It's the new research around us that's creating and shaping the future. Well, now we have this. There's also tech. We had Akamai, we had Cambridge Innovation Center. We have many more that I'm not plotting. We have what this region has is actually a lot of infrastructure B2B technology companies that are not yet getting to your phone, right? There may be the IP in your phone. There may be fueling every bandwidth that you have in your phone, but you don't really see those brand names in your phone. But now you're starting to see these brand names, Yahoo, Amazon, IBM Watson, Twitter, Philips, Google, coming closer to us. And you may ask, why are they coming? Well, they're not doing search advertisement in the Cambridge site for Google. They acquired ITA, another MIT startup. ITA is the software that fuels all of the airline industry and all the reservation systems. So if you have problems with your reservations, blame your MIT colleague. But they acquire that, and now they bring all of their intelligence in analytics and big data to apply to what? To the revolution in healthcare. Right? We have now these biggest data sets. The reason IBM Watson Health moves to our neighborhood, IBM Watson, I remind you, is headquartered in New York City. IBM Watson Health is headquartered in Cambridge, Kendall Square, because they want to all be creating the adjacencies and the concentration in their field. Same thing with Twitter. MIT is the only university that gets what's called a Twitter fire hose. And you may have heard this fire hose MIT concept. MIT has access to live streaming every tweet around the world. You may have seen a couple of news releases in which MIT researchers, one of them we know well, Andrew Lo, uses tweets to predict market sensitivity and to make sure that that there are some hedge funds having an edge based on tweets. Well, you can't do that research without having access to that live stream, and MIT is one of those. So we're becoming now, taking all of these advantages and using it to create this amazing puzzle of companies, technologies, capabilities to use within MIT. It's also run venture capital. So now you have technologies, you have research, you have space. Now you have the people who have the money to invest and risk capital to really advance some of these ideas. And not only that, but MIT started, and MIT Sloan played a significant role in like all of these, Enterprise Forum, the entrepreneurship competition, the Entrepreneurs Club. But now with the acceleration happening in these last 2 decades around MIT, what we have is a constellation of programs to support innovation and entrepreneurship at the level of student, at the level of researcher at MIT. And this constellation that happens by department, by school, across MIT, has now led to the MIT Innovation Initiative, which is an engineering and Sloan-led initiative, to create a pathway for if you are a graduate student, if you are undergraduate, if you're a postdoc, and you may all go back to your experiences here, navigating the MIT system, it's not easy, right? To know what you need for what you want to do, it's not easy. Now you have really a pathway to say, I want to do this, what do you want to do? You're looking for an accelerator, you're looking for a program, what do you want to do? Legal advice, and it directs you to the programs that we have. So think of it as a manual for getting innovation and entrepreneurship into the system. So finally, before I transition to Steve, I wanted to tell you, like, well, I've told you the history, not where we are today, because now Steve's part is going to be where we want to be in the future and what MIT wants to enable. So what MIT wants to enable is not what we already have, but way many more dots, way many more companies, way many more initiatives that are really the vehicle for fulfilling our mission of research, education, and innovation. And this translation and commercialization effort is all today not done at Bell Labs or at HP Labs, some of my experience. It is done through these little ones that are taking the risks and going around this MIT. So what we see here is this concentration in life science, the purple dots, but you see the diversity of it. And what you see is that it is concentrated. And concentration is actually the name of the game in innovation and speed of innovation in what we do best, which internally we may be referring as tough tech, not an app. There's not an app to cure cancer. So what we want to do here is enable more of this, and Steve will tell you a bit more.
Thanks, Israel.
Hey, before I have a question. Why didn't MIT, when NASA moved to Houston instead of there, why didn't MIT sort of do another sort of acquisition and buy that land?
Because that land is federal land. It's federal land within Cambridge, and the federal government was not interested in selling. But there's a corollary that Steve may touch upon on that one today.
Yeah, so the federal government's held that land since that period of time, and a lot of it's gone fairly idle. As you can see, you can look out and you'll see a bunch of surface parking lots out there today. So, Israel's talking about this activity here. We're really talking about innovation, and innovation is critically important. If you think about what's going on in the world today, particularly if you're a developed economy, you can't compete on low cost, particularly in the labor side. So innovation is critically important to compete, to generate wealth and prosperity and security for your nation. So everyone around the world is trying to do this, and trying to do this in a big way. We see a group a week, a couple of groups a month coming through MIT, looking at what's going on, and they're doing the tour around the world to look at other innovation clusters as well. So Israel talked about 3 critical components. It's really land, having the space, the special space available. It's labor, it's the talent that we have here, and capital. So we have those as strengths, which we have used to leverage this. But there's some other components as well, and in supporting innovation, and it's in our mission, and it's in our organization in a way. Our mission statement actually says that we'll advance knowledge through research and teaching. But in addition to that, we're going to work with others to take this knowledge to bring it to bear on the world's greatest problems. So that's an important element right in the mission. And in our culture, 156 years ago, William Barton Rogers wrote his paper around the formation of MIT. And in that, he basically had envisioned an institute that would have an academic orientation that would have connections to industry that would hopefully help facilitate intelligent industry. So we have that in our culture as a competitive advantage, that this is not new to us to have innovation and trying to push it out into society through our relations with industry. Let me just talk about some of the linkages as you see. So these are some powerful things that have happened that we have seen in the last decade or so. But if you talk about genomics, Israel talked about the Broad Institute. So this is the successor organization to the MIT and Whitehead Genome Mapping Project. That was critically important to mapping a huge chunk of the human genome back in the 2000 era there. So all of a sudden, we have the Broad Institute here. Geez, it's not unusual to see that a large pharmaceutical company may want to be co-located nearby to be able to look at pharmaceutical targets that may have something to do with genome organization or defects or other challenges. They can also screen populations to see if drugs are more effective on one or another. You also see MIT invested in brain and cognitive sciences. This is a 400,000 square foot center that has neurologists and cognitive scientists working in a building together to try to understand the function and form of what's going on in the brain. As a result of some of the activity here, we were capable of attracting Pfizer to Cambridge, who uprooted their neurological research headquarters from Groton in perfectly acceptable space that was down there and moved them next door to what was going on at the brain and cognitive science because they wanted that interaction and to try to get the innovation push that is happening in Cambridge. So they're looking for competitive advantages. You see it in cancer research. You walk down the street, you'll see the Koch Institute for Integrative Cancer Research. It wasn't too long after that period of time that Sanofi decided the desire to move their oncology headquarters to Cambridge. They ultimately ended up buying Genzyme and making a much bigger commitment in the area beyond that. And then things like creative technology. You'll see this at Stata with our computer science and our artificial intelligence activity, and the Media Lab where you have a convergence of design and IT and other things happening in technology. All of a sudden you're attracting people like Google and Microsoft and Facebook and Amazon and other folks are taking a keen interest in being in Kendall Square. Beyond the big companies, as Israel said, we haven't forgotten that it's so important to have innovation occur with our entrepreneur folks in coming out of the school and being attracted to Kendall Square. So facilities like CIC where people can come in and actually rent a chair or a suite or a series of suites and scale their business in a fashion that eliminates risk, allows them to share common infrastructure, and lowers the cost for people to actually come out and create an idea and do it in this environment. Same thing at Lab Central. You can actually go in there and rent basically a single bench, a suite of benches, and you can start your life sciences organization using common equipment that you can share with others so you don't have to buy a centrifuge or other major capital pieces of equipment. So these things have helped facilitate the push of knowledge out and the idea creation and trying to build tools that will help entrepreneurs push it up and also creating the connections with industry at large. If you look, many of you, I saw the hands go up, and many of you have been here prior to 2000. And if you get on the street, this is Main Street right here, and Vassar Street, and you can see the Stata Center there. That area was a series of parking lots, loading docks. There might be food trucks out there where people went and got lunch. Today, there's about $1.5 billion of investment in that area with academic basic research initiatives that have taken place in the last decade or so. And in there you see the Stata Center, which has, again, computer science, artificial intelligence, electrical engineering, and linguistics. You'll see the Brain and Cognitive Science Center, which I talked about as neurology and cognitive sciences, the Broad Institute, genome mapping. You've got life scientists working next to computational biologists and computer scientists. And you've got the Koch Institute, which has a collection of engineers and life scientists working together. All of a sudden, we're finding that these folks are basically collaborating across disciplines based on their proximity. You've got people from the Stata Center and computer science helping the genomics folks understand big data. You've got folks from brain and cognitive science talking to electrical engineering and artificial intelligence and computer science that's happening across the street. You've got the genome talking to people working in cancer research to identify linkages. And all of a sudden you see at the end is that the whole is much greater than the sum of the parts. So this convergence of technologies is becoming incredibly important to what's happening in Kendall Square today. You know, Wired magazine wrote something on here that this, you know, may be the most innovative intersection on the planet today. So if you walk down the street, you know, you'll get an appreciation for some of the activity that's actually going on in these buildings. So as we're thinking about this, MIT's been involved in innovation and supporting innovation, you know, for a very long time. I'll give you 3 examples of thinking sort of past, you know, present, and a little bit about future in terms of how the physical environment's changing. So, you know, University Park, this was a major investment back in the 60s and 70s. It was ultimately developed in the 80s and 90s as a place where innovation could occur nearby to MIT. That was a major investment at the time. I think it was 5% of the endowment they bet on that as well. And then I'll take you from this over to Osborne Triangle, which is activity that's happening today. This is where Novartis and Pfizer and a few others are, and Technology Square likewise. This really was stuff that happened during the early 2000s up until the present day. And then the next move that we're looking at will be in the Kendall Square area, which is, you know, basically the real estate right outside Sloan as you walk out the front door there. If you look at University Park, what was special about this at the time is it was a nearby capacity. It actually wasn't connected to the Institute. There was a swath of land between the Institute and this area that was being developed, but you could walk from the lab over to an industry and have connections. It proved ultimately very successful. It's about 2.5 or 2.4 million square feet of space. It's been highly productive and successful in terms of supporting innovation and, frankly, urban planning in a blighted area. This was an old Simplex wire and cable factory that went out of business and was replaced by high-tech pharmaceutical and other research activities over there. The next phase, and this, again, I said, like, really went up till about 2000, 1990s to 2000. Then the next phase that we started focusing on was playing off the idea of some adjacency. So it was good to be nearby, and we thought maybe it would be better to be adjacent. So at the time, we bought Technology Square, which had a couple buildings in it, but had about half the park capable of being redeveloped. And it was an office park, and we wanted to convert it into life science. The Institute simultaneously made the decision to locate the Brain and Cognitive Science Center on one of those parking lots that was, you know, the food trucks used to be on. The adjacency of this academic research next door to what was going on in Tech Square became highly desirable by a lot of occupants of that building to get closer to the basic research. The Whitehead is right here, and ultimately the Broad Institute located here. So this became a very important way to sort of break down the barriers of having information flow between basic research and applied research and industry. You'll see in this is Main Street going down this way. Tech Square is just right here on this photo. You can see the Brain and Cognitive Science Center here likewise. Today, Pfizer is in here for about 500,000 square feet of commitment into the Cambridge market. Novartis is here on our land with another 500,000 square feet of commitment. Lab Central is in the middle, which is our incubator space for laboratory. And Takeda Pharmaceuticals was a recent development that was done right on Mass Ave. So again, the feeling here was by being near it, it was more effective in terms of knowledge transfer. As we move today to Kendall Square, we're right here, right now, up in the top of this building. If you look outside, there are basically 6 surface parking lots. Many of you have probably passed over them while you were here at MIT. If you go from Sloan School to the main campus, you got to cut through the parking lot, hop over the fence. If you don't rip your pants, you're doing okay. You make it to the main campus. So we're, at this point in time, trying to create a development in here that we hope will knit together the campus in terms of being able to create a development in this space that will enable us to physically sort of make a connection between main campus and Sloan, to provide capacity on this to enhance innovation and academic activities, and also allow this to be about the most integrated we can be physically. We really are in the heart of the action here in Kendall Square. So the initiative here will be about 1.6 million square feet of space, mixed use. It'll have housing and research space and a host of other amenities and retail and the like. We've chosen this space because it's really at the crossroads of sort of campus and community. For us, this is right on top of the transportation hub here on Main Street. You can see the T. These are the sites that we're talking about. And it really is where the community and the business community really intersect with MIT. We think it's the greatest opportunity for us to have that convergence happen in a very intentional fashion here. The sites that we've lined up, there are 6 of them that are on the periphery of this space. One of them is over across the street at 1 Broadway. So if you look across the Sloan back parking lot over to 1 Broadway, you'll see an empty parking lot there. We'll be putting a large residential tower there with retail all around the base of 1 Broadway. Right next door is where CIC is located. On Site 2, this is the current location of Eastgate. Eastgate will come down and be replaced on Site 4, along with an additional investment of graduate housing of another 250 units. So we'll be essentially doubling or more than doubling the graduate capacity here. Site 2 will be ultimately a research and development building with retailer and gathering spaces around it. Site 3 is behind the Kendall Clock Tower building. So you'll look out right across the street. That'll be actually physically integrated with that building and connected through from Main Street. Site 4 is where the graduate housing is occurring, but also in the historic buildings, innovation and entrepreneurship will be there. We'll have an MIT forum, which is where the admissions office will work in tours. We'll try to create a gateway and identity. If you walk down Main Street today, I give people instructions every day. They walk up and they're like, "Where's MIT?" And I'm like, "You're actually standing on it." So the opportunity to create a better identity here with MIT occupants. Building 5 will be another research and development building, but it will have the MIT Museum in it as a big gateway activity. It'll have the MIT Press in there and a variety of other retail activities. So this gateway will feel much more like an identity piece that's recognizable on the transportation hub so that the general public can actually know where MIT is. And then the 6th building is just really an infill. If you've been to Legal Seafood, which I imagine every one of you have a few times, you look across the street, there's a bunch of MIT loading docks. So we're going to put a small building in there just to basically hide the loading docks, create some retail along the street. This is just sense. Architecture is still in play. We're going through some design today, but this is the building at 1 Broadway. You can see basically a 22-story residential tower. It'll have retail along the street and actually all around the building. We're trying to get things like an urban grocer in here. We're trying to get a pharmacy into the neighborhood. We're trying to get a bunch of other services and restaurants in here so we can have people intentionally gathering in the area. Site 2 is right in front of the Sloan. This would be Main Street along here. Large R&D building. Site 3 this is the one behind the clock tower. Site 4 is the new graduate residence and the relocation of Eastgate. Site 5 is where the MIT Museum will be, and then the R&D above it. You can see the medical building right here. And then Site 6 will be an infill site for some additional retail in there. We'll try to create connections through from MIT Medical to the Sloan School so that when you walk out, you're not walking through a parking lot. We'll create active landscape space, both hardscape and lushly landscape softscapes. Gives us an opportunity to have trade fairs, farmers market, a variety of activities that we can draw people in and make this a center of activity, a much more lively center than sort of the North Court or the more sacred Killian Court. This will be an area where we're intentionally hoping people are gathering and interacting. And then for retail, you'll see that, again, these sites in here where the parking lots are, and there's some retail along the street, we're going to really try to advance the retail activity and gathering spaces in and around Kendall Square and around these buildings and create this open space contiguous right through to the Broad Canal, through the Sloan area, right up to the main campus, and make it a much more pleasant experience to come through and go to the river and connect it all. And hopefully create, again, an intentional gathering space where this will hopefully promote more collaboration amongst the occupants in here and lead to more innovation. So at the end, if we get it all right, hopefully we will be in a situation where MIT and our business community and the city of Cambridge all benefit from this activity. We're hoping to create these intentional interactions, which we hope will further innovation in Cambridge. We think this will make MIT and Kendall Square a competitor in terms of talent attraction. So the more exciting we can make this environment, the better chance we get the smartest people in the world to come and join us. It's a competitive advantage for MIT and also for Kendall Square occupants. Tech transfer, we hope, is enhanced, economic benefits and growth, and at the end of the day, we create employment opportunities and create, hopefully, a better urban streetscape and quality of life for the people in the area. At the end of the day, again, we've gone through a long process here and have finished our approvals with the City of Cambridge. We're now going to go through some design, and our hope is that we could actually be in the ground starting work on phases of this project sometime later this year. It could potentially take up to a decade to complete this phase of it. So why don't we stop there and we'll take questions.
As you probably see, this is a history building on a legacy of innovation and dedication. This has been, I know for Steve and I, has been a 6-year project in the making. We just got the approval 2 weeks ago for the master planning. It's a terribly exciting time. Our colleagues who have worked tirelessly on this and see what Sloan's been able to transform in just 6 years, like the buildings, and we see this future, and it makes us really smile. So we hope we can make it happen.
But there will be phases, I guess.
There'll be phases.
So the first phase, it's very exciting. When is it going to be completed?
When is it going to?
First phase.
Well,
We'll start below grade. So one of the things we're actually doing, the parking goes below grade. In those parking lots today, there'll be 6 levels of underground parking. We're actually going to put loading below grade, so we're actually improving the public spaces. So it gives us an opportunity not to have the buildings interrupted by loading docks and dumpsters and all that, so we can create nice open space and gathering spaces almost 360 degrees around these buildings. So that will start, we hope, this fall, and a little of this is dependent upon, the occupants showing up and desiring to be in the location, so it is a little bit market dependent. Some of this academic stuff will probably go right out of the gate.
so I think I want to be in time for my 20th reunion. I want to be able to relate some buildings that are actually physical. That's the short answer.
Yeah.
And it will take maybe the 25th reunion to get the whole thing done.
Sure.
What is the role of the Sloan School in bringing together the business side, the north side of the campus, and the research, and what could it be? Are you satisfied with what the Sloan School is doing,
Well,
faculty or students, or so in joining these two?
Well, I think it's playing an integral role, right? So a couple of things. One is, actually, can you flip back one? So as Steve mentioned, right here, right here. So the Trust Center for Entrepreneurship today is located at the Muckley building right here. Right? It's just inaugurated the new space. I don't know if you've been able to see it, but it's actually a fantastic space. But it will move to this building, right, at the center. Innovation and entrepreneurship, which is really driven by Sloan in this center, will move at the base of this building and create a front door from Main Street to that. The second aspect is through the competition, through the 100K and others, that's really how entrepreneurship is enabled. And the work of Fiona, for instance, as Associate Dean, together with Vladimir as Associate Dean in Engineering, they are co-leading this innovation initiative. So I think that it is happening. And what we're now working is to create, what I would say there's an intramural effort. That's what's going on. We want to work on the extramural, right? And what else can we do and should we do in connection with this development? But remember, these are the 3 ingredients. This is just one, right? We're going to create space. We're going to curate that space. We want to think about others that would make this. But I think Sloan is stepping up to be a hugely connecting tissue for that.
So it appears that most of the companies that have located around MIT are either biotech or supporting biotech. And I'd ask you, is that a correct assessment? And was that intentional, you think, on MIT's part, or has it just developed that way? And do y'all want to diversify and see this becoming as diversified as Silicon Valley in terms of the type of technology that locates around MIT?
So let me give you my answer. Steve may have views. I'm not sure Silicon Valley is that diversified either, right? But I don't. I also want to correct a misimpression. This is not just biotech. I had a tech timeline. I would say around 50% of all of these businesses around MIT are medical biotech related. So there's a huge anchor. I think the research of MIT and what happened in the biology department in the 70s really enabled the biotech revolution. And what you see is that's the case, right? You see Akamai in little, talk about compression algorithms and the advent of the internet, and everybody wanted bandwidth, and that generated Akamai. But there are companies in cybersecurity, in infrastructure, and what I call B2C, right? What you see is there's a lot of tech that's going on today that's related to infrastructure improvements that are more connected to the basic research of like computer science and intelligence, and artificial intelligence lab here, machine learning algorithms. You may have seen this device from Amazon called Echo, right? That you can instruct and say, it's like, kind of get an appointment for me or this. Well, that technology is computer technology, and that's the Amazon lab here. So there is a strong diversification with, I would say, a bias toward biotech. We may want to think about having others here, but what we really care about is this spectrum of from small entrepreneurial activity, medium to large, because that's what really creates the pathways for innovation.
Can you describe generally your philosophy, your MIT's philosophy of the capitalization of all of this, and also the MIT's commitment from the corporation's perspective and the endowments to, kind of making all this a reality?
Well, I'd say that from a commitment level, it's a high-level commitment and a pretty strong one. We've been doing this for a long time. I think we have to be judicious in the use of our capital as we go through this, because the capital that we have here at MIT is competed for everything that we do. So every innovation, every academic thing that we do. So we have to be thoughtful about how we've done that. We have deployed this capital over time with initially some seed money that was probably more patient than maybe some others would be. But we've been in a position where that capital has returned and been able to generate funds flow that enables us to harvest that capital from one area, move it down the street and start another initiative, and then move it down the street and do another initiative. And in some of these instances, MIT, Israel talked about MIT's campus being about 14 million square feet. We own about 7.5 million square feet of commercial space around the campus that this has been, over time, has been through these disciplines. We don't own every single element of that capital stack. So we may have created something and harvested it. In some instances, we've sold off the buildings and kept the land. So Technology Square, for instance, we repositioned that, redeveloped that, sold it to Alexandria, and harvested that capital and moved across the street and started working on the Osborne Triangle. We kept the land. It comes back to us in 48 years, free and clear. So we get those buildings back, and MIT still possesses it and can redevelop it again. So we're trying to be thoughtful about it. Israel has worked really hard to help us with financing on the availability of debt, working with rating agencies and a variety of other things. So we've gotten a little bit more sophisticated over time with it. We think we're well prepared for the next phase of this. But it is you're in the real estate business. It's a challenge. You got to make sure it works along the way.
So I'm not sure where you were trying to get with the question, but what I will say also from an MIT perspective, and I'll tell you, so let me use Site 4 as an example, right? So if this were an academic development, these buildings would look different, and it would not be, I would say, structured for a return, which would create issues of discipline, right? And I would say that's what happens when you don't really have hurdles and discipline. If you have an all-commercial development, you could also not have a housing tower like this that's affordable for our graduate student community, right? And the balance is how to make those two happen and to think about return, not on just economic terms, but return on the impact of the MIT mission. And how we think about, and this is I would say, a privileged position to be in. Because when we go and compete, first, our timeline for this is actually we're here to stay, right? We've been 100 years. We'll continue to be here 100 years. The second one is if this is a developer that wants to monetize this and capture returns in 10 years, forget it, right? So you're not going to have this working for our community. You're not going to have the retail we want to create for our community. You're not going to really have the intensity for our community, because maybe this one should have been 3 times higher, right? And we say, no, 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 what we want is this character, because we believe in MIT. And I would just go back to Sloan. I mean, we were here in 2001. This was the unrenovated E52. And I can tell you the atmosphere and the aspirational imagination of the students that come pre-210 and after 210 is quite different. So just having this space, and if you go upstairs and you kind of overlook the river and have the quality of space, it really goes back to this 1 million square feet where MIT moved and really dare to dream. And I would say this daring to dream is really this class. And I'll just share one quote for you guys, because this was a very interesting quote. MIT, believe it or not, has to go through reaccreditation every 10 years. So we're at risk of losing the degree granting capability we have, right? So we need to be serious about it. And we have a committee that comes. And this committee is a highly reputable committee. Last time it came, it was chaired by the president of our rival institution on the West Coast. You may or may not know who he is. I think you may have guessed. That person came and said, you may be, in fact, you are the #1 institution in the world, but you don't look like it. And I think there's a huge amount of pride that we take in this. And the other thing I want to supplement what Steve said is that I've made my personal mission to say, well, MIT moved in 1916, invested, and it didn't put any more money in maintaining those buildings for 100 years. So I have made my personal mission, together with Alan and many other people that work in our organizations, to just change that. And today, we're spending $1.2 million a year in renewing the campus, aside from our commercial enterprise. So if you think about capital allocation, we're allocating a lot of money to the space and the physicality of the campus that's conducive to the new wave of technology innovation. And that's what we certainly believe, the administration of MIT believes it's what needs to happen.
What are you going to do with the Metropolitan Warehouse?
So the Metropolitan Warehouse has been a question for 60 years. And it was tried this past year as an example of like what we could do, and now we're actively studying it. We're thinking about a potential active use in the ground floor that would support the maker movement at MIT. And then the floors above, we're studying what would the best use be. We have found an intervention of the building that we believe works to create light and maintain the historical character. But as Steve knows, there are bookshelves, plenty of books with studies of the Metropolitan Warehouse that went nowhere. And I think we have found now a way to do it. And we're now trying to find out what that use of the Metropolitan should be, or to maximize MIT's benefit.
It was built very well as a fireproof warehouse, so well that we've had challenges adapting its use. You have another question?
Yeah.
I don't know if this is on. Can you comment on the participation of the city of Cambridge in this planning? Because if you tried to do this in California, it would take 100 years.
It has felt that way here.
Yeah. I asked somebody in Houston, because they were going through that, the Texas Medical Center, huge area where they have a competitor to this area in terms of intellectual capital. This has taken Israel and I 6 years to go through this piece of just Kendall. So the other stuff is taking equally long. The Osborne Triangle, I had the first plan drawn in 2001. We're still finishing buildings out there, so 16 years later. So this stuff does take a long time. Houston told me that they would take 2 to 3 weeks to get that project approved in Houston. If you were in California, it might take 12 years. Here it was 6. So it felt like a long time, but
Overall, they like it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was the first time when we met with the city manager, and the city manager has since retired, but he had been the city manager for 39 years. He went with us to each city councilor to pitch this plan because he felt so passionate about creating a center of Kendall Square And he said, this is the only time I've ever done it in my entire tenure as the city manager of the city of Cambridge. And he was so excited about this happening. At the end of the day, there was lots of debates, there's lots of impacts, and we had to go through all that. And that's all understandable. And at the end of the day, I think we morphed the proposal. We listened to people. We took a lot of stakeholder comment. And MIT was very responsive. At the end of the day, I think people were excited about it. So
Maybe one last question. Or not.
In terms of traffic, that's one thing that strikes me when I come back to here is there's a lot of traffic in Boston in the area. I'm assuming that the city and traffic planners and everything have been all over this. And do y'all think that that's is addressable in terms of being conducive to the residents and the tenants in here? Is having a good traffic plan?
There's no question that development has impacts as you go through it. But the good news is we're hoping the Longfellow Bridge will be open when our first phase is. That's a killer right there. And we've spent ample time here. We have a lot.
I was going to say the traffic will be better like 15 years from now.
Yeah.
But it's not the case.
Yeah. It's hard to predict what's going to happen with technology. We do know that we're on a transit hub. The MBTA is working on how to, we know there are ways that they can improve throughput on the transit. Most of it's signaling, but it is budgetary. They're running through their challenges. So this is going to be one that is going to be resolved over a longer period of time. We're confident that people will find ways because every city grows over time in America, and that will happen. And we'll have growing pains, and we'll solve them, and we'll come up with new technology. At the end of the day, we think this is it will fit in quite nicely to what's going on here. And we'll have to deal with our challenges along the way with mitigation through buses and other venues.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.